You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 22nd of July 2026 on Monocle Radio.
If a nuclear energy deal with the United States is good news for Saudi Arabia, for whom is it bad news? AI agent goes rogue, which sounds like the start of a film which will not end well. And how much sleep should our leaders be getting? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Erin and Hannah Lucinda Smith will discuss the day's big stories, and we'll hear from Guy De Launey in the Balkans on the difficulty of debunking even 30-year-old conspiracy theories. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller, and I am joined today by Erin O'Halloran, historian at Cambridge University and the author of East of Empire, and by Hannah Lucinda Smith, journalist, regular Monocle contributor and author of Hinterland's Journey Through Europe's Unfinished Frontiers. Hello to you both.
Hello.
I think we've done enough shilling of both your books for one show, and we've had you both on talking about them as well at great length. Listeners can find those interviews wherever they like. Let's talk about what you have been up to recently. Erin, first of all, you have a podcast adjacent or podcast related project imminent.
I do. I've got a podcast coming out early this fall. It's called The Cambridge Prehistory of Partitions, and it's based on a series of sold-out walking tours that I gave at Cambridge last year when my book launched. So basically, it shares the history of the partitions of India, Pakistan, and Palestine, Israel, how they relate to the built architecture and to the university in the town of Cambridge. And we had such high demand for the walking tours that we decided to record it and turn it into a podcast series. And there's going to be a walking tour, a dinner at the Permit Room, which is a Bombay speakeasy run by Dishoom in Cambridge, and the launch of the podcast all on September 18th. And anybody who wants to come can go to uncomfortablecambridge.com and check on events and buy a ticket.
Well, you say anybody who wants to come. I mean, these are events which are famously always discussed by people in a completely calm, reasonable and non-confrontational manner. Have any of your walks or any of your talks ever kind of imploded along those lines? I'm
very proud to say that no. We've had space on the tour for a wide variety of opinions and backgrounds. We've had people whose family histories are deeply entangled with the events being discussed, but the tone has always remained incredibly, civil and inquisitive and open. And I really, credit to the good people of Cambridge who came on the tours from all walks of life and all parts of society, because we really enjoyed ourselves and everybody learned something, hopefully.
The internet is not real life once again.
Exactly.
Hannah, you are... And I'm always slightly nervous when a fellow journalist announces that they are branching out into anything else. Have you been told something I haven't? But you are embarking on a parallel endeavour as a jewellery maker. Is this just going to be a hobby, or do you have grander ambitions?
Well, listen, I am only 3 days in, so it's probably a bit early to tell.
You may well lose interest entirely.
Well, I've already been through the dip. Our tutor did say right at the start, she's like, you will get very frustrated and want to give up, but power through it. And that came for me quite early because, funnily enough, Andrew, it's actually quite difficult.
I would imagine, yes. One of several reasons why I have not attempted it myself.
Yeah.
What are you finding is so far the actually difficult bit? So
it's actually far more physical than you would think. Mm-hmm. So the hardest thing, when you're sawing metal, which is the kind of key skill which they teach you first, it's not the hand that you're sawing with, it's the hand that you're holding the metal with, because obviously it's a very sort of small thing that you have to grip very, very tightly, and very quickly it starts to hurt your hand a lot. And you sort of come away at the end of the day sort of with, arthritis, with like a clawed hand.
do they tell you, I feel we are in danger of deviating from the point, but just one further question is, do they tell you that it's one of those things that your muscles and your hand become accustomed to? Because the closest analogy in my own head is learning to play the guitar, and obviously the first few times you do that, your fingers just hurt unbelievably because they're not used to being folded in those fashions, and the skin on the tips is really thin. But eventually you get over it.
Exactly. But the problem for me is, so I'm right-handed, right? So I'm sewing with my right hand. This time with jewellery making, it's my left hand that I'm really gripping. Because I'm a writer and I spend I handwrite all my notes. So I already have problems with my right hand because that's my writing hand. So now I feel like I'm just building myself up for problems in both hands.
Well, on that happy thought, we will start with Saudi Arabia, which may shortly be joining the coterie of nations powered at least in part by nuclear energy. The development will be facilitated by, depending when you're listening to this, an imminent or very recent announcement of a deal under which the United States will help the Saudis build their nuclear program. On the one hand, fine, whatever. However vast the lake of oil upon which Saudi Arabia sits, the petroleum-producing nations actually understand better than most that fossil fuels are not the future. On the other, it obviously enlarges the potential of Saudi Arabia building a nuclear weapon, something Saudi Arabia has already cheerfully said it would if Iran did so. Hannah, first of all, if we just look at the proposition as it's being pitched, is there any reason at all why Saudi Arabia should not have a nuclear energy program?
Absolutely no reason at all, because, everybody is very concerned about fossil fuels, the effect that they have on the planet, the fact that they're going to run out. Saudi Arabia, of course, although it has been diversifying in recent years, an oil-dependent economy, that's not good for anybody, least of all the Saudis. Nuclear power is one of these interesting things, right, because it sort of goes through waves of being fashionable or not fashionable. And I think ever since, was it 2011 when the Fukushima disaster happened, I think people have gone off nuclear, whereas before it was sort of seen as not quite a renewable, but certainly a sort of greener option. Of course, there's another layer on this, which is what else can be done with enriched uranium.
Well, indeed. And on that front, Erin, are we convinced entirely by the Saudis' protestations, leaving aside the caveat that they've said, well, yeah, obviously, if Iran built one, we would build one. Leaving aside that, are we convinced by them saying that other than in that circumstance, we're not interested in a nuclear weapon?
I'm personally not convinced of that. No, I think that the context within which this is happening, within which this deal is taking place, is incredibly important. There's absolutely nothing wrong with a sovereign nation seeking to have a nuclear program for energy purposes. But it's very difficult, I think, to disentangle this from the ongoing war in Iran, the Saudi treaty that's already been signed with Pakistan, which is specifically about nuclear weapons and access to nuclear weapons for Saudi Arabia in the event that it is attacked. And that this is also, from the United States side, it seems not entirely innocent from my perspective, because it's part of this broader sort of regional strategy that is focused on containing Iran. So it doesn't seem to me, either from the American side or from the Saudi side, entirely innocent.
Well, on that thought, there's a very heavily stressed insinuation, Hannah, from the United States that to the effect that, look, Saudi Arabia is going to build a nuclear energy program. Now, either we can help them with that or somebody else is going to.
Well, that's a convenient get out, isn't it? I mean, who else is going to help them? I guess there are people who could step up, perhaps Russia. I mean, Russia's been helping Turkey, for example.
Indeed.
And I guess from the US's point of view, you could say, well, it's a good business opportunity, and if they're going to do it, then we want to be involved. But I think, as Erin said, you can't really separate this from the context of what's happening in the Middle East. And of course, Saudi Arabia has been the most enthusiastic Gulf state about the US and Israel's attacks on Iran. Clearly, it's seen an opportunity in the past 6 months or so to really kind of finish off Iran as a kind of regional power. And it's very, very difficult to separate that from this.
I mean, this deal, obviously, Erin, would have been in the making for some time. This isn't something that has just been cooked up out of thin air in the last couple of months. But is this now, as the United States would see it, about putting further pressure on Iran?
I can't see any world in which it's not about putting pressure on Iran. It's the sort of announcement that is inevitably and inherently inflammatory given the context within which it's being presented. Mm-hmm. So no matter when these conversations started, let's say, the fact that they're currently being announced and laid out and potentially accelerated, and that this is the moment that they're choosing, it is not accidental.
And just a final thought on this one, Hannah, because there will be a number of interested observers of this, one of them obviously being Israel. Would you care to estimate how overjoyed or otherwise they may be about this? Because, in fairness, their relationship with Saudi Arabia is not anywhere near as non-existent as it once was. There had been, obviously, before October 7th, 2023, some suggestion that normalisation was possible. But will they be thrilled by this prospect?
No, in a word, they will not. I mean, of course, we had the Abraham Accords, another Trump project, bringing Israel close to various Arab states, including Saudi Arabia. That hasn't really withstood the pressure of post-October the 7th and Israel's attacks on the Palestinians. I think
nobody's quit the Accords, though. Nobody
has quit the Accords, but I think, the Middle East is an unpredictable region. Let's put it that way. Let's use understatement. You never really know what new kind of alliances are going to be formed. So I think, for Israel, for a long time, barring Iran, it has been, the only kind of nuclear power in that region. I don't think it's going to want to see that challenged.
Well, to our onrushing tech dystopia, OpenAI, best known as proprietor of glorified speak-your-weight machine ChatGPT, has announced that one of its more advanced AI models has gone rogue and hacked a startup called Hugging Face, whose proprietors may well have asked ChatGPT to suggest their name. The OpenAI agent was apparently being tested in what was supposed to be a controlled environment, but outwitted whatever safeguards there were before embarking upon its attempted conquest of Hugging Face. Heartwarmingly, OpenAI said that while this incident was probably the first of its kind, they expect it to become much more common. Erin, are all our listeners better off at this point, frankly, keeping everything in cash in their mattresses?
Absolutely. That's going to be my approach. That is my approach, actually. I was really heartened to hear Hannah say that she does all of her note-taking by hand. I also do that, and am resisting the tech overlords, with everything I've got. So this is a terrifying story on many levels. Hugging Face, the name, for me, I don't know about you guys, but it actually made me think about hands reaching out from the phone and grabbing the face of the person that was holding the device. And I thought that was a bit too literal, a description of what is happening to society at the moment. I don't think that there's anything about this story that's particularly surprising. We all know that the technology is completely out of control, that it's unregulated, that the people who have created it and are supposed to be overseeing it have no idea what it's truly capable of, and that the guardrails are completely insufficient. So looking forward to discussing many more such stories in the coming weeks and months.
Because the thing is with this story, Hannah, I think it's fair to say, had OpenAI not announced this had happened, and I suppose we should be somewhat grateful for the transparency, probably very few people would have known or noticed or indeed cared that it had happened. But does it suggest that something of this sort that the rest of us have no choice but to notice is more or less inevitable?
I mean, I think the question is, how often has this already happened, right? It's the first time we're hearing about it, but as you say, we're hearing about it because they chose to let us know. And I think, it goes to the heart of the broader issue within tech, which is about regulation. How much power should we be giving to these companies that are making this absolutely world-changing technology, which we're all pretty much sleepwalking into a dependence on in some ways? I mean, again, I am a resistor. I was only quite recently persuaded to use AI as a kind of research tool. I would certainly never use it to write anything. But the amount of people who do, and do so unquestioningly, is staggering to me. But I think, like I say, it goes beyond AI. I think it's all of tech. We sort of unquestioningly just put our faith in these tech companies they basically have the same kind of power almost as states and governments do, and they're completely unanswerable.
They are, and they do seem, Erin, disproportionately to be run by amoral maniacs, which is arguably not ideal. But Hannah raises the point of regulation. Have we passed the point at which seriously states do need to be serious about this? Because on the one hand, I do understand the thing of letting brilliant creative minds think of brilliant stuff and letting them be encouraged by the market and letting the market encourage them and so forth. But you do reach a point, as we have with every new technology, at which governments actually have to say, all right, we need some rules here.
I think we can liken it to the drugs, like the pharmaceutical sector, or to the firearms sector. We have a technology that, left unregulated, has demonstrated the capacity to kill people in multiple ways, in all kinds of different ways, whether how to commit suicide or the actual robots that are, currently being deployed on battlefields in Ukraine and Gaza and Lebanon. There's all kinds of contexts within which this technology is operating essentially autonomously and ending lives. So yes, we're at the point where there should be some regulation, just as there is in the pharmaceutical sector and just as there is in the firearm sector or the weapon sector in general. We need government oversight stat, and it's heartening that there have been some, beginnings of moves in this direction regarding social media and minors, for example. But that's very much, I think, the thin end of a wedge, and we need a lot more regulation and a lot more research. I think one of the big problems with this is that the research is inevitably lagging so far behind the technology, both in-house and in terms of what external actors, such as governments or major regulatory bodies, can even keep up with. By the time they're running studies on what are the effects of AI has outpaced them by 6 months, a year, 2 years. So that's one of the major problems, is that the tech is being rolled out way faster than anybody can understand what are the implications and the consequences of it. And that makes it very difficult for regulators to keep up. But we need that effort, and it shouldn't be a government effort. It should be a multinational effort. It should be, on a like Interpol or something. We need something major to combat it, because the reach is global.
Just before we move off this one, I will ask you both in turn. Hannah, you first, because I'm always curious about this, because I don't doubt myself that AI is already being used and will be used in all sorts of ways, for good or for ill, that I would not understand in a million years if somebody explained them to me. But have you personally found it any use whatsoever? Because I, for one, and regular listeners will be aware of this, have not. When I have tried to use various AI platforms as any sort of research tool, which is where I thought it might be useful, I have found it actually consumes way more time than it actually saves, because it is by and large useless. It doesn't respond to instructions, and it just plain makes things up.
Yeah, you have to. It's as good, I think, as the questions that you're putting in.
What are you saying?
Okay, so work on your questions, Andrew. So here's what I find it very, very useful for. If you're going to put in something called a freedom of information request, which is sort of bread and butter of journalists, it can often be quite hard to know whether the information that you're asking for is already available in some form, buried deep within a government report somewhere. And rather than doing it the old school way, which is look right through, for example, the Home Office's website, every report they've ever produced, if you can sort of calibrate your questions very, very well and say, search for this particular thing within the Home Office, blah, 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 it can sort of do searches and find out if some of the information that you were going to ask for through FOI is already there, and therefore save you kind of 4 weeks of research time.
I can see that. Erin, have you found it useful for similar reasons?
I have one specific task that AI performs for me, which is transcribing calls and interviews.
Yeah.
It is spectacular for that. It saves 10 hours of transcription.
That always used to be the worst thing about being a journalist.
It's also the worst thing about history. And I have a tool, I pay for it, that is encrypted and that will not share the data with any other platform. So everything that, it's confidential essentially, which is very important in our line of work. And all of the calls, it not only transcribes them, but then it gleans, what it thinks are the most interesting or key points and creates a summary that is then searchable back to the transcript. So that is an amazing tool. That is the only thing AI does in my life.
Well, to Japan now, the Prime Minister of which, Sanae Takaichi, has issued what is either a boast of a superhuman constitution or a cry for help. Amid vouchsafing to voters that she had spent all of last weekend reading documents and answering emails, she said that since becoming Prime Minister, her average night's sleep had been somewhere between none whatsoever and 3 hours. Interestingly, even in a famously workaholic culture such as Japan's, not a few lawmakers and commentators have suggested that one, the Prime Minister's delegating skills may require honing, and two, that they'd broadly prefer that their country wasn't being run by someone who spent most of their workday bumping into furniture and looking for the glasses which are in fact on her head. Hannah, this is mad, isn't it? Nobody can function on that.
It's absolutely mad. I mean, it's interesting. It's quite Thatcherite, isn't it? And it's interesting because she is, a self-declared fan of Thatcher, and I wonder if there's a little bit of that behind it. But, I certainly find if I don't get my full 7 hours, I'm kind of useless. I'm very grumpy. Definitely can't concentrate. Definitely making stupid mistakes. Now,
shouldn't be in charge of a G7 nation.
Absolutely. I can just about be a journalist. That's completely fine. But, even sort of things that you sort of do automatically, things like driving a car, it's been proven that if you have not had enough sleep, it's as dangerous as being drunk.
Oh, easily, I would think.
Right.
Yeah.
You just should not be doing these kind of things. Yeah.
Erin, as a historian, a thing I wonder about, is this one of those things that, because it is so common, is perhaps under-considered in how it shapes human events? Because I have asked people who have been or are actual leaders of nations or people who work for them. Because I think I was curious about this at some or other summit at which I'd had a lousy night's sleep and all I had to do was interview the people who were actually attending the summit. And I did ask a couple of them, at these things, how many people are actually making nation-shaping decisions feeling absolutely as zonked as I presently do now? And what they all said to me was like, pretty much everybody all the time.
Yeah. And isn't that a terrifying thought? I think also what Hannah just said about, cars and the studies is really relevant because we forget how many world leaders throughout human history have been inebriated as an almost constant state. So that's also to, be factored in. This isn't necessarily new. Even if they're sleeping enough, they may be drinking more than, is generally recommended for human health. But the main thing that this story made me actually think about was studies both by Harvard University and in this country, the National Institute of Health, that have indicated a strong correlation. They're inferring a strong correlation between sleep deprivation, particularly in people in their 50s and 60s, which is the age of most world leaders most of the time, and dementia.
Yep.
And that actually resonates with the experience both of Thatcher and of Ronald Reagan, who also boasted about getting 3 to 4 hours a night. And it also speaks to, sort of the long-term consequences of this really, it's an incredibly detrimental practice for your overall health and well-being, but specifically your cognition, to not be getting enough sleep. So it explains a lot.
It really does.
To be fair, if you realize that, at least if we think about the last 100 years or so, that most world leaders most of the time are either sleep deprived or inebriated or both.
Well, on which subject, and this did ring a bell, so I looked it up earlier. Winston Churchill used to wake up at around 7 in the morning, Hannah. He didn't actually get out of bed until 11. He would spend most of the morning reading, dictating letters, etc. But by the time he got out of bed at 11, he was already at least one whiskey in. Mm-hmm. And by and large, he is regarded as somebody who mostly did all right as a Prime Minister. Has Sanae Takaichi got it all wrong? Should she be taking a leaf out of his book?
Possibly not. I do wonder how Churchill would have got on in the 21st century, where there's a lot more kind of day-to-day scrutiny by the people who voted for him. I think these things look a lot better in retrospect, don't they? And obviously Churchill's also got the sort of added glow of having, sort of brought us through the Second World War.
Well, indeed. Through most of which he was at least somewhat soused. However.
Well, you'd have to be, wouldn't you? I mean,
and Donald Trump doesn't drink. Is this one of those things, Erin, where we can at least a little bit blame the voter? Because if it did emerge in a modern country that, for example, your national leader tends to get out of bed at around lunchtime, frankly, after they've already had one or two, people would get unhappy.
I don't know. Isn't this exactly Pete Hegseth's schedule at the moment? It's true that Donald Trump doesn't drink, but there are other people in his administration who are really making up for it. I think that actually there are a lot of allowances being made, and potentially this is also an enormous amount of scrutiny on Japan's first female prime minister. I have all kinds of criticism of her, but I do think that potentially this is an unwinnable situation. If she was getting 8 hours a night, people would say that she wasn't working hard enough, and vice versa.
I did wonder about that. Hannah, do you think that may be a factor, that she is possibly, again, one of the many burdens of being, well, not just the first female leader of a country, but any female leader of a country, is that you cannot, betray any hint of any frailty whatsoever?
Yeah, and I think that's a problem, actually. And I think, what's an even bigger problem is this tendency that we all have to sort of see not sleeping a lot as a mark of strength, and as a good thing. And it's not. I personally am a big advocate of the afternoon nap. I say half an hour after lunch when you're having that dip, you wake up feeling fantastic and you're so much more productive afterwards.
Or in the case of Donald Trump, a cabinet meeting. But to France now, the parliament of which has found something it can agree on, voting overwhelmingly oui on a bill which aims to address France's mountain regions and the specific quirks and requirements thereof. Nearly 30% of France is classified as mountainous, and the folks living up there often face difficulties accessing public transport, healthcare, schools, accordion repair shops, and so forth. The mountains are also especially susceptible to problems associated with climate change, most obviously dwindling snow, which is discouraging for skiers. Erin, there have not been many moments in recent years, or one might argue all of French history, in which you could look at something that their lawmakers have done and think, wow, that just seems broadly sensible, pragmatic and reasonable. Is that what has happened here?
And not only that, but a lot of them agreed.
I know. They're probably
they came together and did something sensible. It's remarkable.
They're probably all still sitting in their seats with dazed expressions going, God, what just happened? Yeah. This feels strange. But does this actually seem, as far as it's possible to tell, broadly sensible?
Yes, it does. It does. And hopefully we've got lots more common sense policy coming our way as, we try and grapple with the effects of climate change, which are, of course, going to affect a lot of people, not just in the French mountains, but everywhere else, as we've really, really experienced in London this summer.
Because I did wonder, especially if we move this into a slightly British context, Hannah, we have a new government, or at least a new Prime Minister here, who is very enthusiastic about devolution. But is this perhaps a better way of thinking about devolution, not so much in terms of region as such, but geography?
I think it is, because, mountains do come, or mountain living comes with its own specific challenges, and I can speak with some experience on this.
Oh, please do.
There you go. I actually bought a house on a mountain in Greece about 10 years ago.
Is it still there?
It is still there. It is still there. But, this sounds so stupid in retrospect. But I didn't think about how I was going to get furniture up there. And it's actually very problematic. And the people on this island do have their own solutions to it. There is a specific shop where you have to go, and there's a massive catalogue, and you choose your furniture from it, and it all comes flat packed, and then a guy sort of drives on a hair-raising drive up the side of the mountain, and they have to assemble it. But it obviously costs a lot more.
Mm.
And
I mean, you could just sit on the floor. That's a perfectly feasible solution.
Yeah, exactly. Or you could think about it in advance, which is probably what I should have done.
See, the thing is, where mountains are concerned, Erin, I have little to contribute having grown up in Australia, and that is one of the few things we don't have any particularly extreme version of. The highest peak that we have, Mount Kosciuszko, you can basically stroll to the top of in an afternoon, and it's a none too stringent walk at that. Have you ever lived at any sort of altitude at all?
I have some wonderful memories from my 20s of spending winters in Fareia, which is a old school ski resort town about an hour and a half from from Beirut in Lebanon. Mm-hmm. And Fareia is a really, really beautiful place. And from the peaks, you have not only fabulous snow through the winter months, but also fabulous views of the Mediterranean. So you can, in fact, be on a chairlift going up a slope on a gorgeous January or February day with all kinds of fresh powder and admire the sun glinting on the sea. And it's probably one of the best experiences that life has to offer.
Erin O'Halloran and Hannah Lucinda Smith, thank you both for joining us. Finally, on today's show, the role and the value of the foreign correspondent may be dwindling in the eyes of some media organisations, but our own man in the Balkans, Guy De Launey, brings us the story of a Bosnian wartime conspiracy around sniper tourism to highlight why having journalists on the ground to debunk myths still matters.
When foreign correspondents' clubs are struggling, we're all in trouble. Declining membership of these venerable institutions is not just a matter of regret for hard-drinking journalists living out their evil in war fantasies. They serve as an indicator of the overall health of international news gathering. From Reuters to the BBC to the Washington Post, the world's great news organisations have been slashing their networks of foreign correspondents, and as a result, they've left swathes of the world uncovered by resident reporters, and it's not only their audiences who are losing out. Foreign correspondents provide crucial on-the-ground information based on long-term knowledge of their patches and the people who live there. They don't just tell us what's happening, but understand the context and the importance of particular events. Without them, news outlets are left to publish material that's often little better than guesswork. Perhaps a cut and paste from vernacular media, with the errors produced by Google Translate left unchecked and unchanged. Or, at best, a light rewrite from an overworked reporter at a desk which might be thousands of miles away from the scene of the story. The negative consequences of this approach can be serious. Misinformation spreads, false narratives take hold, and corrode societies where people believe what they read, hear, and see, little realising that very little in the way of actual journalism is behind the reports. For example, you might have heard about the so-called sniper tourism phenomenon in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is the extraordinary story of how extremely rich individuals from across Europe paid huge sums of money to Bosnian Serb forces in the 1990s for a ticket to the front line of the siege of Sarajevo. The Bosnian Serb forces then presented a grotesque menu ranking potential targets by age and gender. Young children carried the highest price tag. This tale started spreading around the world last November after Italian media picked up claims being made by a little-known writer who said he'd submitted a complaint to prosecutors in Milan. Within days, the story spread to international media, including some of the world's best-known and most respected outlets. Some of these pieces even voiced outrage that this macabre scenario had gone undetected and unpunished by international war crimes courts. Swiftly, the narrative took hold. Amid the misery of the siege of Sarajevo, hundreds of millionaire monsters had been satisfying their twisted bloodlust by killing women and children for kicks. The Italian writer who was the source of the claims proudly boasted that he'd never visited Bosnia, and didn't plan to before he published his book on the sniper tourism phenomenon. One can only assume that the international media outlets who uncritically regurgitated his allegations didn't have any reporters on the ground in the region either. If they had, they might have never published pieces which would fail even the most basic fact-checking process. Resident correspondents have developed relationships with the people who do know what happened in Bosnia in the 1990s. They follow the first rule of journalism when presented with a story that doesn't seem right. Can you stand it up? That can present a problem when dealing with editors who now operate in an environment where the law of clicks on sexy stories can be hard to resist. But when an editor trusts their correspondent, and vice versa, they can ensure that damaging nonsense doesn't enter the public sphere, at least not through their particular outlet. The damage is real and lasting. Once a false narrative has escaped, it's extremely hard to counter. Investigative outlet Balkan Insight has published an article debunking the Italian writer's outlandish claims, virtually line by line. That, of course, takes time, resources, and expertise, whereas copy-pasting an article can be done in a matter of seconds. That material is already being used by AI models to generate their output, spreading the misinformation further. It would take another entire article to detail the negative impact in Bosnia and Herzegovina, a country that remains deeply divided thanks to ethno-nationalist politicians. Many people I met on my most recent trip to Sarajevo didn't know what to believe. They'd already seen human beings plumb the depths of depravity during the war, so perhaps sniper tourism could be real. Others were angry. The atrocities committed in the country are a matter of judicial and historical record. One doesn't need to make anything up. But that is where international news currently finds itself. If news outlets don't have resident reporters, they leave themselves open to inadvertently spreading misinformation or worse. At a time of hybrid wars, rampant disinformation and hate speech metastasizing through social media, the need for expert foreign correspondence is arguably greater than ever. For Monocle in Sarajevo, I'm Guy De Launey.
Thank you, Guy. That is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Erin O'Halloran and Lucinda Smith. Today's show was produced by Chris Chermack and researched by Nkeli Martin. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.